Hey, KK, welcome. And thanks for joining us today. As a way of getting started, give us a little background on yourself.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm so happy to be here. Um, I am KK Anderson, Kristen. Everybody calls me KK, and I work with Baker Communications. And I specifically sell our sales assessment that's run by Objective Management Group. And I
And
have been for 12 years.
yeah, and how'd you get into this?
Gosh, how did I get into this? You know, Specifically as it relates to the product that I sell now, about 10 years ago, we had a client and they were actually the first, at the time, they were the only company in the Fortune 50 that was growing faster than Apple. And they had acquired 32 companies that year. And, as their like sales transformation consultant, we had to figure out a way to like take those 32 companies and help break down all of those silos and create one process, one approach, one management system. And we recognized that we really needed some good data to be able to make those decisions and to do that. And so that's when I discovered Objective Management Group and the assessment that they did. We employed it with that client. And that client is still using it today, right? And so it was game changing for them. And after that, it just became a true passion of mine.
Yeah. And what do you like about it?
I like that it turns selling into a science,
Yeah.
right? And because, you know, everyone always thinks that selling is an art. And sure, there are some artistic liberties, right, that we have as sellers, but there's also so many things that if you have a little science behind it, it can help you almost like a roadmap. It's like looking at Waze or Google Maps and knowing not just, hey, turn left at the third church on the right, but it's like turn left in 247 feet and and this is how far you're going to go before you have to turn again. It's being able to like see objectively like exactly what you can do to be more successful, right?
Okay. And at what level, though? What level of granularity? Is it at the conversation level or is it more at the process level?
Well, so for me personally, like I think of it like almost like blood work, right? Like if I know, for example, that every day at 3 o'clock I get tired, and then I go to the doctor and I get my blood drawn and I see, oh, like I've got a low B12 or low magnesium level and I need to do these things to fix that, right? I don't know that about myself unless I go and I get the blood work,
Yeah.
right? And then I can make the necessary adjustments. And so for me personally, seeing and knowing what my own self-limiting beliefs were, or like a big one for me, because I love to talk, is that I talk too much. Duh. I talk too much.
A sales
So,
rep talk too much?
right.
How
But what
could
I
that happen?
learned is that if I could figure out how to stay in the moment with customers and just squash my compulsion to like jump in and interrupt and talk and just be like, oh, I know all about that. And let me tell you about that. And oh, I had a client who did that. Like I talk. Like when I learned that I'm bad at listening and staying in the moment, I was able to fix it,
Yep.
right?
Okay.
And I was able to just listen and just keep asking questions. And sure enough, that customer, that prospect would then like walk their way over to me.
Okay. I get that. And well, can't that also be an art? I mean, the art of conversation?
It is definitely the art. It is definitely that can be an art, but if you don't know you're doing it, then you don't know what you don't know,
Yeah, that's true. And
right?
what do you like about selling this? Now you've used it, it's helped you. When you get
Um,
when you get into a discussion with somebody, I'm sure they're skeptical, right? Or
there,
at best curious. Maybe they're interested, but that's probably they're talking to you because you're connected to this other company, right? Is that true or
They're talking to me because they have probably, there's been some connection between Baker Communications and this prospect or this customer, and they're interested in some type of a sales transformation at their business,
Yeah.
right? So, uh, we always recommend that they start with the data and they start with this kind of blood work so that they can make the right decisions. Like, hey, do they even have the right people in the right roles? Like, do they, um, do they know what blind spots they have, or if they are going to be able to hit their sales plan or their revenue numbers? They have the right managers, and are their managers having the right impact? So when they're talking to me, they've got a lot of unanswered questions that they want to answer, right? And so this data then provides like an X-ray for them to be able to make some of those decisions.
But I'm thinking, like, if you take us, because is it skill based?
It it's all kinds of things, right? So it's about the assessment itself is like 180, 200 questions, and it is everything from when you're even thinking about picking up your phone and calling a prospect, like what's going through your mind? Like, do you have what self-limiting beliefs are blocking you? What is
Okay.
supporting you? What are you going to say? How do you posture the conversation? Who are you calling? Are you calling the decision maker, or are you calling someone that's low? Right? Are you hoping to get introduced up? Like everything. And so as you think about the whole sales process, we're asking questions about every single step of the way so that we can identify what their competency is at each stage of the process and then what their tendencies are, right? And where we could help lift them.
But can't they game the survey or the questions?
It's interesting because when you take the assessment, you should take it, Brian. I would love to see it. You would probably
Well,
score
I
100
game
on
everything.
everything. Huh?
I game everything. I know. Well,
Yeah. So, but
because the salesperson knows why they're taking it.
we're very upfront with that because we want them to know, like, hey, we're looking to resource and provide the best possible tools for you to be successful, right? So
Yeah.
it's important that they're honest, right? Um, but when you take the assessment, you realize that there's really no right or wrong answers. Like they're all sales specific, scenario based. There's really not. There's really
Well,
not. Like
well,
you're like, well, this could work in this scenario. This answer could be,
well.
and so
They
it's
know they're being
degrees.
judged on it.
It's degrees of I guess what your approach would be. It really is what we're trying to fish out. And so
No.
if they start answering questions inconsistently, then the system will actually start asking the same question over and over again
Okay.
in multiple ways until it can figure out like what do you actually do,
Yeah.
right? But they do have a few different measures of internal validity just to make sure that you're not trying to game the system, right?
And what's hard about selling this?
Um, it's different. It's a different approach. And so much of like sales training, and this, from your experience, I'm sure it's it's always been such a peanut butter spread approach. And everyone thinks, like, I think I saw Forrester said like 91% of VPs of sales right now, they think they need a new methodology and that's going to solve their problems. And that's not going to solve their problems, right? And so, I don't think that it's what's hard about selling this assessment is that it's a different approach. People aren't used to taking a scientific approach and applying it to salespeople,
Yeah. And how do you
right?
handle that pushback?
Um, Gosh, that's a great question. So I try to paint the picture for them. Like I really always try to first understand their business problem, like what it is that they're trying to solve for, right? And then I try to paint the picture for helping them see that, especially when it comes to their leaders and their coaches and their managers, and really increasing their impact, that when a manager can look at like the blood work or the x-ray or whatever you want to call it, when they can look at that makeup of 180 coachable findings about somebody and then go to them with, hey, here's a plan. let's work on this plan. KK, you need to learn to stay in the moment, girl. You're great, but man, you talk too much. Like, here's how we're going to do that step by step by step. And they can put an action plan around it, right? Whereas, a colleague of mine could have the exact same score in a competency, but their makeup is totally different. They're great at listening, but they just don't ask enough questions. Yeah. Right. So every seller is different. And I think that's how I kind of respond to that objection. Everybody's different and everybody needs to find their own 2 millimeter shift.
Yeah. And what do most managers think the problem is? Because clearly revenue isn't where it should be. That's why you got a prospect, right?
It is. I think there's a lot of subjectivity as well from a manager's perspective, right? You would be shocked at how many sales managers out there don't know what the pipeline sufficiency number is for each one of their team members. Like, they may say, oh, it's 3x or it's 5x, but no. Is it 50? Is it 52 ops? Is it 5 ops? Like, what is the, based on their closing ratio, based on their average deal size, based on their quota attainment goal? Like, everyone has their own pipeline sufficiency number and everyone should have it memorized, right? And that manager should be working with them to either close the gap or progress the pipeline. And like, a lot of people don't have that granularity, right? They don't have that North Star.
But is that the North Star, or is it just total revenue?
Well, what leads us to total revenue?
I'd argue it's not pipeline.
Well, it's closing. It's winning the pipeline, right? It's closing the pipeline.
Oh, well, you have to close.
Right.
But
that contributes to the total revenue. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What do you think it is?
Well, I think it'd be a bunch of things. It could be that they're not making the deal big enough. They're not talking to the economic decision maker. They're talking to one person within the account.
For sure.
Hoping that person's going to do the internal selling.
That's right.
Even though they don't know how to.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And so, and that's, the assessment data tells you those kinds of things as well.
Yeah.
Right. What their qualification competencies are, and are they talking to the decision maker? So I think as a manager, you want to be able to see all of those things.
Yeah, I think managers kind of have feelings about reps.
They do.
Right? If they're selling the way they sell.
Yeah.
Right.
Which most of them are promoted because they were great salespeople, right?
Great salespeople who worked the internal system and, fed the CRM. They played both sides of the game. They weren't the person killing it, but not playing the internal game.
And then they show up in management
and
then they become super sellers.
It's all over. It's all over the map. And
so,
because I've never worked for a sales manager who, a couple that would treat each person as an individual. It was always, they wanted a cookie cutter, identical to the way they sold, whether it's top down or bottom up or product based or relationship based or economic based. But all of them can work in some way because it's a huge skill set in sales. Right. Because it's not just knowing the industry, you got to be able to interact with people and communicate and listen and understand and organizational dynamics on the client side and being able to tell when the champion's telling the truth and when they're not. And it's just a lot.
That's absolutely right. So I use this iceberg analogy a lot when I'm talking to customers, and I think it helps to kind of put it all into perspective, right? I also kind of describe it like a spider web, and you might have even been the one that taught me that in one of your podcasts or one of your videos that you do. But the concept is that when you think about a salesperson's capability, so much of it is what you can't see. It's the stuff under the water, right? like that grit factor, that will to sell, that heart, like that is, I mean, that's half of the equation, right? Are you unconditionally committed to getting uncomfortable, to trying things you've never tried before, to stepping out of your comfort zone?
Yeah.
Right. And if you're not, and your manager doesn't know that, well, then that's the definition of insanity. They're going to be expecting different results, but that person is not, they're just not going to do that. And so, but if you know it, then you can work with them on it. Right.
Now, you've had a lot of success selling
Mm-hmm.
this. What makes you so successful at it?
My approach is not, I don't really even think of myself as a salesperson, if I'm being totally honest. Like, I'm a problem solver. Like, I genuinely want to help my customers grow their revenue, and I want to help them solve problems. And I want to figure out, I always start with their OKRs and their objective key results to say, okay, what do you want to increase? Is it yield per rep? Is it the depth of your relationships? Is it retaining accounts? Like, what is your goal? And then how do we work backward from that goal? And if my product's not a fit, well, then so be it, right? I guess I would say I've been successful because it's not about me. It's about them.
Good. I like that. And what do they typically tell you is their problem?
Well, sometimes they'll say, oh, I need a new sales methodology, right? Or, oh, we need help negotiating. We're getting a lot of objections. We need help responding to
Tactics.
objections. Right.
Tactics.
And I'm
Yeah.
like, actually, you probably have a sales process problem, right? Because there's probably the right conversations aren't happening before that are causing these objections to happen on the back end.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. So, you know, I have no, I feel like I've heard it all.
Yeah. And where does the deal get stuck? Or how do you evolve that conversation? Because they start with, we need a new this. You start with, well, to really determine if that's correct or that will solve the real problem. Because the real problem is we don't need a new
Right.
methodology. It's we're not reaching what we feel we should.
So typically, once we have gotten to a point where we really understand their compelling event and the urgency that's behind it and the size of their business problem, then I shift the conversation to kind of really talk to me about that iceberg concept and helping them to think about their sales organization and their players, their managers, their leaders, like a bunch of icebergs, right? Because every one of them has the heart aspect. They have the mindset, the DNA that's going to either slow or stop their ability to be successful. They're going to have the know-how, the tactical things, the stuff above the waterline. And so when they start thinking about it from that perspective, they're like, okay, well, how do we know what's below the water? And that's where we say, well, we can help you with that.
Yeah. And do they buy into that?
They do.
They do. Well,
A
why do
lot
you
of
think?
times,
Why
a
do you
lot
think
of
they
times
do?
we'll also do like a proof of concept with them as well. Like choose some sellers for them to assess and to look at the data and look at the blood work. And I tell you what, like when they see it, they're just like, oh my gosh, that is spot on.
Wow.
Okay, let's do it.
And how often is the results from the survey different than what they perceive it to be?
It does happen. And it's really interesting because well, our assessment product that I sell, it has a 91% predictive validity. Like it's definitely been proven over many years to be predictive. It's definitely not predictive of past performance, right? And so you have all kinds of sellers who have had success despite their assessment results, and maybe it's
Really?
exactly like it could be their amazing personality, it could be a
Look,
amazing customer service,
timing,
or
yeah. Position,
it
right.
it could be their manager who goes around playing whack-a-mole all day and closing deals for them, or it could be their territory, or they could be the benefactor of the best leads. Like there's a million reasons. And
Yeah.
it actually happens all the time where their number one seller is not like that didn't score the highest on the assessment. It happens a lot, right?
Sure. I mean, let's face it, because sales is not a very confined experiment. It's just the opposite. There's millions of variables. You have the
So many.
economy, you have timing, which client, what they buy before, what the perception is, all of these things. And sometimes they work for us and sometimes they work against us.
But the one thing that they have in common is that none of them we can control.
True.
So we have to control the controllables. And so as sellers on our own path to success, it's, having that sometimes like gulp moment where you're like, oh my God, I suck at listening. Right.
Well,
Another one for me personally was responsibility.
yeah.
I had a low personal responsibility score and I was like, what? I am very responsible. I make my bed every morning. But that's not what that meant.
Well, I certainly love the idea of it getting a result that's not from a human being,
Yeah.
because you don't get the coach doesn't like me or the
Yeah.
teacher hates me. It's like, well, there's no coach or teacher here. It's
Yeah.
like, this is,
This is what it is, buddy.
and
Yeah.
maybe that's the wake up call that a lot of people need.
Well, and then the wake up call is one thing, but it's like, what do you do with it once you get
Right.
it, right?
Yeah.
What do you do with it?
Because I got to believe that, well, out of, if I've done know anything about salespeople in my own ad hoc LinkedIn surveys and polls research, is that the delusion is the dominant state in sales.
And if that delusion persists, well, then what the heck is ever going to change?
Right.
And that's really what this is about, is cutting through the noise and the subjectivity and the opinion and the excuses
Egos.
and the egos. Yes. Yes.
Because sales is this weird profession where the results can be orthogonal to the skill in
Right.
both ways. It can be over um, reported or underreported. Because there's so many variables. It's not like a quantifiable game like football or baseball where it's well understood and structured. It's this kind of ad hoc thing.
Right.
Yeah.
But if we're controlling the controllables and we know that a sales process is a forward motion sport, right? We got to touch first base. We got to touch second base. We got to touch third base to go home like the Astros and win, right? And score a run. Then we can use data to be able to figure out, like, where are we getting tagged out?
Yeah.
And what like new habits can I employ? Like, what action can I take? What coaching can I seek? What development training do I need? Like, what do I need to do to make sure that I am not getting tagged out at second base?
Well, let's take you, since you're certainly a fan of the survey
Mm,
and it's worked for you clearly from the results. How,
sure.
how did you take on the responsibility thing?
Um,
What was
so it was a
the
little bit of a kind of a self-actualization thing, right? So my initial response was like, okay, that's really weird. I feel like I'm totally irresponsible.
denial?
And then denial. And then as I learned about really what that finding meant, what it meant was that my tendency when I lose or when I would lose an opportunity was to just immediately talk about all the things I couldn't control. Like, oh, they already have an assessment that they use, or oh,
Deflectment.
they, competition was cheaper, or oh, they're in technology, their budgets are all getting slashed, or oh, whatever it may be,
Yep.
right? And so then, as the days went on, like I started hearing myself, and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's another excuse. There's another excuse. And it did not take long before I was like, oh my gosh, my responsibility is in the toilet,
Okay.
right? Because if I could shift that conversation and instead of blaming other factors and then say, hey, KK, like, okay, going into this, that these are going to be some some false beliefs that this customer may have, or some objections that they may throw up that are going to happen. You need to work that into your sales process, work it into your questions, work it into your stories that you tell, right? To knock down those dominoes before they become an objection, right?
Yeah. And so now if something like that happens, what's the self-talk that happens
Well, I have a mirror sitting right here on my desk. And I'm like, okay, that sucked. What can we do differently the next time so that it doesn't happen again?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't happen every time, but I try.
Well,
Because, salespeople lose more than they win.
right. And, that's one of my big things. It's like you paid the loss of that deal was the tuition for that lesson.
Yes.
And if you rationalize it the way you did before, you paid the tuition but didn't get the lesson.
My boss always says, you come in second, you pay the most to lose.
That's a great
I've
one.
learned that lesson the hard way. I have lost some big ones. I will tell you that. I've also won some big ones.
And so now you put that into your preparation for your calls so that you don't have you been able to kind of hone in on other
Yes.
things that kind of either contributed to either losing, delaying a deal, or
Well, because I'm a people pleaser and a talker, and when someone, one of my big kind of aha moments personally was that when a customer would, or a prospect would start asking me like, oh, how much does that cost? Or what, how do I do that? How do I implement that? Okay, we want it. Let's just get started right now. But I haven't touched second base. Like, I haven't uncovered their compelling event. I used to be like, oh, well, let me just get straight over to telling you about, the value proposition, or giving you a proposal, or making a presentation. And every single time it comes back and it bites me.
so
Right? Because they don't know what they don't know. And when they see that price, they're like, wait, what?
right.
Because I didn't take them through the process. And so I have learned that that's a trigger. And I need to respectfully answer their question and bridge them back to where we are in the process, so that we can then move forward in a way that I know is going to, be successful.
So we talked about listening, taking responsibility, preparation, and following the process. What are some of the other big ones that either you or most reps, because finding these things out early in your career is critical before they
Right.
become deep habits.
I think one of the most consistent that I see as a deficiency across I've done this now 580 something times with customers, is reaching the decision maker early in the process.
Yeah.
Overwhelmingly, when I look at the data, salespeople, they start where they're comfortable. They start low, or they start with their existing relationships, and they're afraid or don't have the confidence to call that high level.
That's a big trap.
Right. And that takes confidence, and it takes practice, and it takes mindset, and it takes, just like Kobe Bryant would get up at 4:30 every morning and go throw like 1,000 free throws every day. Like, he practiced every single day. And being able to craft your skill at calling a decision maker and doing it successfully and having a good conversation, like, that is a skill that you have to practice. And I don't think sellers practice enough.
That's for sure.
Yeah. So I would say that's
Yeah.
one of the biggest ones that I see. And it's right at the beginning of the sales process. So it kind of sets you up for either success or failure.
They get comfortable with the champion, and they really comfortable talking about what they're buying as
Yeah.
opposed to why they're buying it.
Yes. 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 Yes.
And the decision maker is typically not the user of the product. So they don't care about what it is. They care about the why they should care about it, why they should be interested.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Any others that are big or huge?
Um, Not that we haven't talked about. I think that's the decision maker is the big one. And then that consultative approach, like approaching, I call it the two sale mentality, right? It's approaching every opportunity like it's two sales, right? The first one is why change, right? Why do I have a business problem I need to solve? And you got to cross that bridge before you can take them to why you, right? And that is a nod to the sales process we talked about, and then also consultative selling and selling value and doing it in the right order so that you respect the process.
And how long did it take you from the time you did the assessment to you became really good at selling this?
Gosh, no one's ever asked me that before. I first took it, I think it was 2014. And my first year, I've been number one for the last 5 years. So I guess it took a couple years.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I didn't know what I didn't know at the time. Right. So I've definitely become a student of my own game.
And has anything other than the assessment helped you? Recording calls, getting a coach, asking for feedback?
I did hire a personal coach that, she was amazing. She has helped me a ton over the years. And lots of training, we've got lots of training opportunities through our company. Lots of conversations, lots of highs, lots of lows, lots of reflection, lots of, man in the mirror moments.
Yeah.
But I'm never giving up. Like every single day is a new day. And I'm consistent. I
And,
always want to be better than I was the day before.
and was the hardest part the acceptance, or was the hardest part the correction?
Gosh, that's a really good question. Um, some of them can be tough pills to swallow, but when I get feedback, I think of it like my blueprint for what I need to do to be better,
It's
right?
present.
It's a present. Yeah. And so the correction is hard because you have to put in the work, right? I don't know that there's an answer to that. That's a trick question, Brian.
Well, both are really hard, but
Yeah.
I think the acceptance,
Yeah.
because I'd been a sales manager and I haven't been a good person to give feedback because I usually be real nice until it bugs the hell out of me. And then I spurt it out and it comes as criticism instead of
Yeah.
coaching. And then people have a real hard time taking it. When you, and I've tried to make it appear like a present by
Right.
saying, you'd sell probably another 100% more if you did this. And then they argue with me, and then I'm like, I know they're not ready.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's hard to give that type of feedback, because I had a rep who he was a chatterbox. He could not stop talking, would interrupt you, would run you over, and he did it with customers. And I really had to sit him down, and he didn't talk to me for a couple weeks.
So would it have been helpful for you to have a tool like this to be like, look, the data
Oh, now you're
shows.
selling me. Look at you. You're selling me, closing me. Well, I think
Data shows. You
that
gotta listen.
that's what's good about that's what I like about assessments is that it's objective. It's
Yes.
not someone's opinion.
Yeah. And
Eh,
and that's why it's important that you use an assessment that is not a personality based one, right? You don't want to measure someone's personality or their extroversion or
right,
how they
because
act in social situations because it does not apply
you've
as
seen
much in sales.
introverts be
Yeah,
very successful salespeople and
that's right.
extroverts fail at sales. It's
That's
like,
right. It's not a personality thing.
yeah,
It's the balance of the art and the science.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
watching a lot of your videos on LinkedIn.
That's the key.
That's right. Super helpful.
Okay, Kay, I really appreciate your time today. Where can people go to follow you and learn more about your work?
You can follow me on LinkedIn. It's Kristen Keen Anderson is my profile. Or I mean, I don't really have another place to follow me. I wish I did. I
No.
guess I should make one.